Hi, welcome to another Table Talk. I'm Israel Anderson. Today we're going to preview a new study called The Bible on Yahweh. I wanted to have a tool, a video that you could share with people that would contain an abundance of what the Bible has to say about Yahweh, because most Christians think we don't have any evidence. They want to say we're Gnostics or Martionites or any other term like heretic. Because they're not aware of how much evidence is in the Bible. They're not aware that there's more evidence for our position than there is for the traditional position. And so the goal of this is to show people just what is here. The Bible on Yahweh, we're going to start off today with the tester, and we'll come back and do Jesus and Yahweh and look at context. Context is going to be very interesting when we get to that. And then some of the real story, the real gospel, and the contract for humanity. But there's not going to be everything in here. We're not going to talk even about the garden at all. It's not going to be comprehensive by any stretch, but it's going to be enough that it should overwhelm the person and make them realize, there's a lot here that I didn't know about. So let's start off with the tester. When a Christian influencer tried to use the temptation story as evidence that Yahweh couldn't possibly be Satan, I kind of chuckled at that, and I started to produce a study on that. And let's look at the tester, because the tester looks like we've got a bit of a rendering issue there. The tester is the same in the Old Testament and the New Testament, right? So we have this tester in the Old Testament. Actually, let me just hide a bunch of stuff for right now, and we'll just go through the Old Testament tester, and we'll start to see that there is a person, an individual, a tester that is testing the Hebrews, and he uses language that is very similar to what we're about to see in the New Testament. But let's familiarize ourselves first with the tester in the Old Testament. And I've provided references for every single point throughout this entire study, but we're not going to read the text just because we would be here 4 or 5 times longer. The text is quite long. What this will force people to do is try to prove me wrong and go and look up the text for themselves, which is fantastic. That's exactly what we want. We want them diving into the Bible. So let's kind of skim through this, and that's all we'll do today. Is we'll look at the tester here, and we'll look at a checklist, which is very interesting, and then we will come back and start with what Jesus had to say. So Yahweh calls himself the tester. Okay, I'm not even going to read out the reference. You can see it there, and you can go and look it up, and you should. Okay, you should always check the things that I'm showing you. Yahweh calls himself the tester. The Hebrews went through the waters of the Red Sea on their way to the desert to be tested. The Hebrews were led by Yahweh, their father, into the wilderness for 40 years. Yahweh tested the Hebrews in the wilderness. Yahweh deprived the Hebrews of food. After 40 years, the Hebrews still craved food. I wonder if we should do this in parts. Let's skip the second part and just stick with this part for a second. So this is the context, right? And we could pick many, many different aspects of the Exodus journey to compare to what we see in the New Testament. But I think that what we have here for now is sufficient. Well, when we look at the New Testament and we look at the devil in Matthew 4 and Luke 4, we'll start to see the striking similarities, right? In the New Testament, the tester comes to Jesus, and he's called the tester, okay? Jesus went through the waters of baptism in the Jordan on his way to the desert to be tested, right? Just like the Hebrews went through the waters of the Red Sea on their way to be tested. So all of these are parallels. Jesus is led by his Father's Spirit into the wilderness for 40 days. The devil tested Jesus in the wilderness. Jesus deprived himself of food. After 40 days, Jesus was craving food. So we have this unbelievable identity of two testers. And are they different testers is the question. When you start to compare them, it's pretty obvious if you just read the first two verses of Matthew or Luke chapter 4, you'll see that the context is set really plainly, that the author of the Gospels is telling us the context here is the Exodus story. Okay. Now, with just this, you've got to be wondering, like, okay, what's going on here? Because this is just verses Matthew 4, 1 and 2, Luke 4, 1 and 2. All right? But as we start to dive into more, what about the kingdoms and the glory? So let's look at this. Yahweh takes Moses to a high place to show him the kingdoms. The tester owns all the kingdoms of the world. He says, all the world is mine. I own the earth and all it contains, the world and all who live in it. You can see the references here again. He says, I am Yahweh. That is my name. I will not share my glory with anyone else, or the praise due me with idols. Not going to share it with idols. Okay. And so we see this plainly expressed in the Old Testament. But what about the New Testament here? The devil takes Jesus to a high place and shows him all of Yahweh's kingdoms. The devil offers Jesus all of Yahweh's kingdoms. If Yahweh refuses to share his glory with another, how can the devil offer that glory to Jesus? Yahweh's kingdoms, Yahweh's glory. How did the devil get a hold of them? Unless the obviousness of the situation is that Yahweh and the devil are exactly the same individual. And that is what the writers of the Gospels were trying to tell us. And because of church tradition and doctrines, and this information has just been ignored. When I started going through all of this, it was quite shocking just how much similarity there was. In fact, here's a checklist. And if we look at this checklist, we can see between Yahweh and the devil, we see in these two stories, the Exodus story and the temptation. Context is the Exodus, goes through the waters, walks into the desert, starved of food, hunger. And so we see all of these different things here, and they're all the same. Now, if you want to make the argument that, oh no, they're different, because it's going to be difficult for a lot of people to accept, what's right in front of their eyes here. If you're going to make the argument that these are two different people, the best argument that I've ever heard is, well, the devil is pretending to be God. That doesn't make any sense here. Like, this is a testing, and Jesus in Luke 11, where he gives his disciples a prayer, he ends that prayer, that's Luke 11 verse 4, by saying, lead us not into a time of testing, but deliver us from the evil one. So he's saying that the tester is the evil one. It's right in your Bible. You can go look up all these references and see, and we'll dive more into the Luke 11 aspect of it later on. But what do you do with this information? They're obviously the same person. How does the devil get all of Yahweh's kingdoms and his glory, which is the recognition of ownership of the kingdoms? How did the devil get those things? how can the devil now offer them to Jesus? And Jesus doesn't, rebuff him and say, what are you talking about? They're all mine. You can't give them to me. They belong to me, because this is what many Christians now believe, that Yahweh is actually Jesus. Okay. So how can the devil offer, if that was the case, if Yahweh is Jesus, how can the devil offer Yahweh's, Jesus's kingdoms to himself if he already owns them all? How does that make any sense? The idea that Yahweh is Jesus breaks at multiple points like this throughout the text. It simply doesn't work. We could think about the contract for humanity, the scroll with 7 seals in Revelation, and we see in Revelation chapter 11 where everything has been said and done, the contract has been fulfilled, and now the ownership of humanity is going to be transferred over to the Father and the Son. From whom? There's lots of things like this. So we'll leave this here for today. Thank you for joining me, and we'll come back and we'll cover Jesus. And there's a lot here to cover as well. So we'll come back and we'll cover all of that. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you to all of my brand new Founders Club members. You guys are just absolutely amazing. Your names are scrolling down here on the bottom of the screen. Appreciate every single one of you. Thank you very, very much for enabling me to do what I love to do. Whoops. All right, that's it. I will see you on the next one. Bye-bye.